Welcome to On the Middle East, Al Monitor's flagship podcast on the big and interesting stories in the region. My name is Amran Zaman, and today I'll be looking at the dizzying developments in Syria, where the brutal regime of Bashar al-Assad has finally come to an end. With me here to discuss all of this is Cengiz Candar, a member of parliament for the pro-Kurdish Dem Party in Turkey. Cengiz is one of Turkey's best-known Middle East experts. So welcome to our program, Cengiz. It's great to have you with us here today.
It's a pleasure and privilege. Thank you.
Momentous events in the Middle East, a region that you know extremely well, have written extensively about, traveled extensively through. So looking at Syria right now, who are the big winners and who are the big losers?
Well, the biggest winner is Israel, for sure, without any doubt. In the overall general context of the international system, it's the United States of America. On the regional scale, it's kind of by default, it's Turkey. And on the local level, it's seemingly, it's the group who controls Damascus and the central power now, which is called as Hayat Tahrir Sham, and its affiliates. And losers, without any doubt, Iran, and its proxies, Hezbollah, the Lebanese Hezbollah. But since the civil war in Syria, particularly after the year 2012 and 13, it was difficult to call Hezbollah merely a Lebanese actor, because it was thanks to them that the power in Damascus, Bashar Assad's power, survived, because they were the main force defending Damascus and its environs. Beyond the region, if we have to look for a loser, other than Iran, because Iran is a regional power, it was a regional power, I have to say, it is Russia, for sure. So if we make a list of winners and losers, I will put these names in it. But these might change, because the foreseeable future is Syria is far from certain.
Well, obviously, the big winner we hope is going forward in particular is the Syrian people, who rid themselves of this very brutal regime. But could you unpack what you said about Israel and the United States a bit more?
But let me come back to your insertion, the Syrian people. Yes, it is true. Of course, Syrian people was under the tyranny of an Arab nationalist regime for 61 years, and for 53 years under the strong grip of the Assad dynasty. First Hafez al-Assad, then who proved to be himself as brutal one a human being can be in the course of the last 12 years, Bashar al-Assad. But nevertheless, when we speak of Syrian people, it has been such a fragmented country, particularly through the civil war. When we speak of Syrian people, it's difficult to imply whether the Salafi segments of the Syrian people, the Alawites, the Druze, Ismailis, the Christians of different denominations in the western part of Syria, in the northeastern part of Syria, and the Kurds.
Obviously, of course, and we'll come back to that. And I was just saying, overall, and hopefully going forward, depending on the kind of rule they face, which is a huge question mark.
Yes.
But let's get back to my question about Israel and the United States. How do they benefit from this situation, apart from the obvious that Iran is much weakened? Because we also see that the Israeli government is registering some alarm about the rise of an Islamist group and the prospect of having a neighbor with very close ties to Turkey, which is very hostile to Israel.
From the beginning of the Arab-Israeli conflict, from the birth of the Palestinian question, Syria, even more than Egypt, was the main antagonist landmass and a country against Israel. Geopolitically, it was the case. In terms of the potential it represented, it has been the case. And particularly after Iran developed its anti-Israeli stance following the Islamic Revolution, and beginning with the 1980s when Israel occupied southern Lebanon, put a siege around Beirut, and got rid of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which pushed the PLO out of Lebanon. Then Iran has become the main adversary of Israel, and which emerged as a power center. And it could fulfill its posture mainly thanks to Syria, because Syria had been the venue that brought Lebanese Shiite populations overlooking Israel, which was represented later on by Hezbollah, and the headquarters of this new quote-unquote revolutionary headquarters in the region, a visionist new power center, Iran. So it has become the backbone of what Iran called axis of resistance. If you remove Syria from this axis of resistance, there would be no axis, no resistance.
No, true, but I mean, we saw the people around Jolani as they were praying at that Umayyad mosque in Damascus talk about, Jerusalem being next. So I want to go back to my question of, is it sort of, one enemy is gone, but might a new one emerge for Israel?
It's true that Tahrir al-Sham is profoundly pro-Hamas, profoundly anti-Israel. And as the reference you have made during this prayer session in the Umayyad Mosque on Sunday, taking an oath to end up in Jerusalem, so on and so forth, there are reasons for Israelis and for many other people to worry for the upcoming future if we will be dealing with these kind of people that replaced al-Assad regime. However, as we have seen, if we speak of purely through grounds or lines, we have seen Israelis demolishing the arsenal of the military arsenal of Syria, as if creating a demilitarized country. And all the military assets that Syria had accumulated and had until a couple of days ago, 80% of them are vanished. And the Americans are bombing the assets of the ISIS in the central Syria. So Syria, it seems, apart from those armed groups who has to rely on some foreign or non-Syrian countries like Turkey, for example, is not in a position to exert any kind of power to threaten Israel. So we have a very interesting situation through the Israeli acts, and they moved to the demilitarized zone in Golan Heights, and now they occupied the entire Mount Hermon. And for the ones who know the geography and topography of the area, it means a lot. I mean, to be in the vicinity of Damascus, it's if you go down from Mount Hermon on Golan Heights, it's a flat surface which leads you to Damascus in 20-30 minutes. And if you occupy the entire Golan, Mount Hermon, it's only 40 kilometers by bird fly over to Damascus, which is under the Israeli artillery now. So whoever will be commanding Syria in Damascus, with all the anti-Israeli fervor or passion or sentiments that they might have to liberate Jerusalem, they are actually now, from now on, they are under the mercy of Israel to survive physically.
Do you ascribe to the conspiracy theory that somehow the United States and Israel had a hand in this, or were they just beneficiaries by default?
Is it possible to say both?
Why not? You say anything you like, Jake.
Well, no. I mean, if it holds any sort of water, this kind of approach, that I wouldn't say they're totally uninvolved and caught by surprise and have become beneficiaries all of a sudden. I think they had some hand in what was going on in different ways, and at the end, but not that this was their project. They didn't bring Hatash, they call it now in English, HTA, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Hatash, they call it.
They call it Hatash. Okay, I didn't know.
That's why I heard from a Norwegian diplomat when I was communicating a few hours ago. He was calling Hatash. We were talking both in Arabic and English. So when he was talking to me in Arabic, he called
Sounds like a Turkish furniture company, Hatash. Okay.
Kind of. Anyway, so, or let's say HTS. So I won't go that far to say the Americans and Israelis a project to bring HTS to power by get rid of Assad. This is the conspiracy theory. It's not the case. Nobody can convince me that it was the case, that it's an American-Israeli project. But of course, through the intelligence, through all the means, technology offered to them, ground intelligence, eavesdropping, everything, and the power of their analysis, they could see where it could lead, the weakening of Syria. Maybe they didn't think that on 7th of October, the regime would implode all of a sudden, unexpectedly. But for sure that they've been following that this regime is almost impossible to survive after what has happened since October 7, 2023 in the region.
So moving on to Turkey, Cengiz, let's go to Turkey.
And they are the beneficiaries, yes. And when it comes to Turkey, but before coming to Turkey, let me put another angle that the actors like United Arab Emirates, with certain endorsements from Saudis, were trying to pull Assad from its alliance with Iran. And this was the American project, actually. And Assad was complying with it. The regime had no economy left. It was surviving in an octagon trade, narcotics and so on, and corruption to the eyeballs. Its protectors from Russia to Iran and Hezbollah was so much weakened in the course of last year. So the regime, for its survival, was ready at least to co-opt with the American plan through UAE and Saudis. And it was Bashar was accepted back to Arab League. In this sense, it seems the Americans have different cards to play. While they were pushing UAE to bring Bashar away from Iranians to the Arab fold, at the same time through Turkey, which was part of the Astana trio, close with a Eurasian outlook in its foreign policy, allying with Russia and Iran. The Americans just made Turkey functional as their intermediary to HTS and other opposition groups. So it was through HTS that the Americans had connections with the HTS, even before maybe their onslaught over Aleppo and their triumphant march over to Damascus. So at least in the last 2-3 weeks, Americans through Turkey had connections with what was going on and what might happen in Syria.
Okay, so let's come to Turkey, one of the big winners. This has helped Erdogan at home, hasn't it, at a time when he was really in trouble, especially after that sort of watershed in March when, for the first time, the AKP lost to the opposition in the local elections.
Yes and no. I mean, he was having very difficult times in the month of April and May. But I don't think that he was in a very difficult situation by September and October this year. And it's not, despite the crumbling economy, thanks to his political cunningness, if I have to put it in this way, and also thanks to some errors on the part of the opposition, he was not in a situation that he felt himself very cornered and anxious for his survival since a couple of months.
Why? What changed?
Well, if you look at the main opposition, there are 3-4 contenders for the presidency. It's too premature and
so
early.
The divisions within the opposition.
But yes, and Erdogan could employ tactics to divert the attention of the public opinion from him, from his difficulties to other spheres, which he did succeed. So by September, by October, by the opening of the new legislative year of the Turkish Grand Assembly, with the speech he made, and then the initiative taken seemingly by his partner, the arch-nationalist figure in Turkish politics, Devlet Bahçeli, the attention of the Turkish public shifted to something still very uncertain, but hopeful whether there would be a remedy for the main issue of Turkey, the Kurdish question.
Okay, so now the Kurdish question is very interlinked with what's happening in Syria. So this has kind of shifted that whole equation as well, hasn't it? The dynamics of the Kurdish initiative. So before we go there, which of course you're a member of DEM, the pro-Kurdish party, and obviously that's your lane. But before we go there, can we just quickly talk about how Syria is helping Erdogan? Because obviously the resentment towards Syrian refugees is huge and has cost him electorally. Now the promise of these people going back, of Turkish companies making billions of dollars, and Turkey in this regional sort of powerhouse, that narrative is now back on the table. And so all of this tremendously helpful to Erdogan, right?
It did, but he didn't lose elections because of the Syrian refugees. He lost the elections mainly because of the state of economy in Turkey. As once in the American elections, it was said, its economy is stupid, kind of a situation Turkey had. And there was a power fatigue, of course, in Turkey, having Erdogan around since over 2 decades, added to economic hardships. And it reflected by the results of the elections, the local elections, which we have witnessed at the end of March this year. But since then, economy is maybe in worse situation now. But nevertheless, this image of Erdogan is better than the end of March. And what has happened in Syria helped him a lot. Because it seemed that he is the man, at the end of the day, justified in terms of his
which is a bit ironic.
Position.
Up until a few weeks ago, he was chasing Assad, begging him to make peace.
Yeah, but now he presents the argument that we knocked on the doors to rescue him.
Oh, to rescue him. Okay, not to rescue Turkey, but to rescue him.
By rejecting our help, he helped his own doom.
He precipitated his own fall.
It made Erdogan even a larger figure than he is. He's magnanimous, more than anybody could expect. Now it's because of his short vision, he has lost. So and it's good that he has lost. We were already against him on behalf of the Syrian people since over 2 decades. And now it seems that with the downfall of Assad, our position from the outset of the Syrian crisis is justified and legitimized. And one thing I have to add, to take into consideration, and I was semi-joking with some colleagues a couple of days ago, and still going on this joke with me, that I'm saying that don't get surprised if in 2 weeks or so, we see Mr. Erdogan praying in Umayyad Mosque in Damascus. It would enhance
absolutely.
it would enhance his image so much that you can't imagine.
I mean, I have to admit that I was wrong because I was predicting that this was going to really turn very badly for him very fast.
But now Anthony Blinken is on his way to Turkey.
Yeah.
And after a month, it will be Trump administration. So when you look at the region from Washington and focus on Syria, you have to come and visit Mr.
Absolutely,
Erdogan and listen to them. So it enhances and even for the Russians. And
well,
the Russians
exactly. That's what I was going to say. I was convinced that somehow Putin wouldn't let this pass, that he would somehow, come back at Erdogan in some way. But then, of course, he has a lot of strategic patience. So we don't really know. But very pragmatically, they're already no longer calling the opposition terrorists and hosting them on Russian state TV. So I guess it's just a sign of how weakened Russia is.
Yes. And now Turkey and Russia, they cooperate and collide on different fronts in Caucasus, in Libya, and also in Syria, other than the Ukraine front, let us say. It's much more balanced attitude or the positions of two countries. But in all these three fronts, in Libya, in Caucasus, and now in Syria, Turkey has the upper hand, or Erdogan has the upper hand vis-a-vis Putin. It's the stronger party in this very peculiar relationship of both cooperating and colliding.
Yes. But the Kurds are, even as we are speaking, are getting attacked by Turkey and Turkish-backed Sunni opposition forces. At the same time, we have this peace initiative. Where do you see all of this going? How is it interlinked, as I believe it is? What is Erdogan's endgame?
Well, it is still, I think, very speculative. For sure, it is interlinked. Any kind of maneuvering or moves in Turkey regarding the Kurdish issue should have connections to what is happening and what will happen in the Syrian sphere. And now we see it. But what's the end game? Well, as far as I can feel, Turkey is not, it's common knowledge, is ready to digest any kind of Kurdish autonomy on Syrian territory. So the end game for Turkey is to end the Kurdish autonomy on Syria. But this is the big question is how to achieve it. Until now, what we heard until recently, let me say, not until now, but until recently, we have heard from Mr. Erdogan that he wouldn't let a terroristan could be or survive in the south of Turkey, which means, and we implying that some military action might take place in order to get rid of that Kurdish autonomous entity beyond the southern borders of Turkey, as it had happened in the year 2019, 2018, and even 2016. So as if that Turkey would dare to undertake a military mission further in the Syrian, northeastern Syrian territory. But the main hurdle is Americans, because there's an American presence there. And so there was a lot of pumping of anti-Americanism in Turkey, which has something to do with it. And the Erdogan-Bahçeli initiative, if we should include Erdogan into it, also because it's also a matter of debate whether Erdogan is with this initiative or not, or is
unimaginable that he's not, if you ask me, though.
Yeah, well anyway, so the still the mysterious part of it is whether do it through Öcalan, but now with this new situation in Syria, And particularly in the latest developments, which has happened in the western part of Euphrates that you had reported in depth, one after the other in the last few days, whether Turkey might reconcile itself in a newly defined Kurdish entity, east part of Euphrates, with a new sort of leadership. And also whether we will see a Kurdish transitional Kurdish presence in the interim or transitional Syrian power structure in Damascus. So there are, after what has happened in Syria, in terms of the Kurdish issue in Syria, in Turkey, there are more questions than the even answers than we
more
had
questions than answers
before a week ago.
But would you agree, Cengiz, that especially now that Turkey's hand is so strengthened in the light of what's just happened, that Turkey has even more leverage to impose its own actors? Because Hakan Fidan recently reminded everyone that there are other Syrian Kurdish groups. It's not just the PYD, YPG, SDF. There's the Kurdish National Council. There's, many other Syrian opposition groups that were pretty much sidelined by the current Kurdish administration in Syria. Do you see Turkey sort of now pushing these guys to the forefront and sort of insisting that they be the ones who speak on behalf of the Kurdish people? And can he get away with it?
Well, certainly let me start from a different angle. Precisely 2 days ago, I had the floor in the Turkish Grand National Assembly, focused on this very issue, and Hakan Fidan was there. We had a small conversation, and when Hakan Fidan was responding to the speeches made, because it was the debate of the Turkish Foreign Ministry, he had to be there, and so he had to respond. So almost all the speeches were on Syria issue, the development in Syria, and mostly on eastern and northeastern Syria. So when he took the floor to respond, but I noticed that he reiterated his remarks that Turkey would never have terrorism or terrorist activities to emanate from eastern part of Syria. And he said, like terrorist groups like Daesh, ISIS, and PKK, he said. It was intentional, or he just neglected to pronounce PYD and YPG, because it was the cliche always when we heard terrorist groups. It starts with PKK, PYD, YPG, and Daesh from the Turkish officials. So this time, he didn't mention PYD and YPG, and he said ISIS and PKK. But most of the time, they use PKK as synonymous with PYD and YPG. But they have the info, and as in your report a few days ago, you underlined that Turkey asks to get rid of the Iraqi, Iranian, and Turkish Kurds in the ranks of the SDF, whose backbone is YPG. So it's kind of a proposal to General Mazlum or Mazlum Abdi and the PYD leaders, saying that if we get rid of those elements, that means for us they are the PKK, and if you Syrianize yourself, we might accept you.
Right.
So this kind of a carrot. Otherwise, we have the stick, which might pound on your heads.
It is pounding on their heads, as you put
and it is pounding on their heads, as it has happened in Manbij a few days ago. But when it comes to Manbij, I think Mazlum Abdi is quite flexible to come to an understanding with the Americans, because it was an American pledge not to have SDF on the western part of Euphrates. And in Manbij area, only 15% of the population is Kurdish. It's not a Kurdish area at all. But the Turks now can force Raqqa. Raqqa is not Kurdish also.
But so let me just jump in with another question, which I believe is a critical one. Do you think that Öcalan has a role to play at this point when it comes to, these non-Syrian cadres having to leave, could Öcalan, through your party members, maybe you'll even go visit him in Imralı, because that seems to be in the works, if he makes a call through you guys to do that, do you think that this could work and that General Mazlum could
I wouldn't rule
fall
it out.
behind Öcalan, who, after all, is the great leader for, all of these groups, be it the PKK, YPG, SDF. I was just in Rojava. I mean, there is hardly a single wall in that place that does not have his picture. So it would give him a way out also, wouldn't it? Because he could still retain his credibility as a Kurdish leader while at the same time making this very pragmatic move that allows peace. Or hopefully, if we can assume that Turkey is sincere and will act in good faith, which of course is another big question. History has taught us otherwise.
Yes. Well, every question and every attempt to respond to your questions bring us even a more complex and complicated picture.
Okay, I'm sorry.
It's a big puzzle. So they are very plausible. The questions are very plausible, legitimate, valid, but the answers or the responses to them, which might be unsatisfactory, because the questions bring my mind the picture that it is so complex and complete. We can get out of this. But coming back to the gist of the questions in terms of Öcalan, as far as I can see, as far as I know that the actors involved, and as far as I can read the situation, there is nobody more than or anybody other than Öcalan who can make a positive impact to unlock the situation, let me say. I can't go that far to say that he will resolve it. Many members of the party that I represent now in the parliament, for them it's Öcalan, full point. So if Öcalan is involved, everything will be fine and everything will be resolved. I'm not that sure about it. But more than anybody else.
That's very interesting. And you say, so you're not sure your party would go with that? And
no, I don't say that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that many people in the party that I represent, because I'm not a registered member, that's why I'm cautious in pronouncing my position. But in the party that I represent, I say many people believe that it's Öcalan, full point. If he's in the game, everything will be resolved. I say that I hope that everything would be that simple. I'm not sure that everything will be resolved with Öcalan's inclusion and presence in the
I see. You're the outlier. Okay, I misunderstood.
However, I say there is nobody other than Öcalan who could make a real positive impact to unlock the situation. He is the one, the capital the, THE. He is the one to unlock the situation, I say. Just because of the reasons you just brought in the question, that you don't see any place in the Kurdish.
Of course, the other part of this is, what do the fighters do? What does the PKK do?
That is the difficult part. One can deliver it, can bring it, but the people in the other side of the border frontier in Kandil, the PKK decision makers in that part, it's not for sure how they would act, and they have also their lanes in PYD and YPG. I mean, you know much better than me, and whatever Saleh Muslim or Muslim says, everybody rises up and say okay and salute him. It's not that simple. It's much more complicated. But of course, Muslim has legitimacy from Öcalan himself, and thanks to his posture that he proved to be an apt commander, apt leader in the area, and
he's very popular among ordinary people, regardless of their ideological leanings. And
I am
Arabs and Kurds alike, let me add, not to mention Christians and others. So he's emerged as a very popular figure. And
very good.
it's kind of ironic that everyone is, talking about Jolani when there's this other man in Syria who's been doing pretty important things, shown great leadership, and very few people are focusing on him. But
inclusion, when Hakan Fidan is underlining there are other legitimate Kurds in Syria, meaning the Syrian National Council people, I don't know how much representative power they have over the Kurds, but it seems as Turkey has pushed SNA as their Arab mercenaries or Islamist mercenaries in the area other than Hayat Tahrir Sham, because Hayat Tahrir Sham is not Turkey's mercenaries. It's not like SNA. So they can employ this Kurdish National Council people as if they are Turkey's Kurds. That's in the game. But in terms of representation, PYD-YPG is the mainstream representation of the Kurds in Syria, I think. But because of Turkey's importance and insistence and power, which is even enhanced after the fall of the regime in Damascus, as far as I can see, Mazlum is flexible enough to include some Syrian national people in the administration of the Kurdish zone and in the ranks. So it's a matter of Kurdish national unity, which I think Americans are working between SDF and KDP in Iraq. So the good thing could be if all these may bear fruits. Otherwise, there are too many elements that would derail all these kind of processes. So that's why it's very complicated, complex, and the foreseeable future of Syria is far from certain. And coming back, I mean, when it comes to the transition to a new regime in Syria, who would be running? Who would be the transition government? It will be only HTS, or some others will be included in it. Would the Kurds be in it? The Kurds would not let to be part of the Geneva process, which led to UN Security Council resolution.
Well, I think
so. There are so many questions in front of us.
Many questions, and finally a reminder that a lot of Syria's wealth is in the Kurdish-controlled zone, the oil, the water resources. So you can't plan a Syrian future without talking to the Kurds. Cengiz, thank you so much for joining us today. We could go on for hours, but I know you're a super busy guy. So take care and hope to have you on our program again. Thank you. And this brings us to the end of this week's episode of On the Middle East. For more in-depth analysis of the region, please go to our website, www.al-monitor.com. Thank you and goodbye.